Ever wonder what life would be like if you stopped running on fumes and started living on purpose? Today, we're talking with Kerri Patt, a coach helping working moms reclaim calm, build boundaries that actually stick, and step into rhythms that nurture both ambition and well being. Y'all, let's do this. Hey, Kerri, welcome. I'm so glad that you're here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Y'all, this is so exciting. So, Kerri and I met about 3 years ago. We were both welcoming our podcast into the world. We were taking a podcast course together. And one of the things that we really bonded around is this feeling that we didn't want to just survive motherhood. We didn't want to just survive work. And we felt like something needed to change in our own lives. And we wanted to help that be a reality for other working moms as well. And so, Kerri, I'd love for you to tell a little bit of your story because I know it's so rich and relatable. What really made you realize that you weren't just going to survive motherhood?
So, thinking back at like the moment that really changed everything for me, it was when I found out I was pregnant. At the time, I was a property manager in New York City. It was right when Hurricane Sandy happened. So, major event. New York City flooded. My building flooded. All of downtown Manhattan shut down. There was generator after generator after generator on the blocks. My basement in my building was literally 3 feet. Once we started pumping the water out, we got it down to 3 feet, and it was like oil and generator fuel. And I'm down there looking at molds, like flopping around the basement. And the next day I found out I was pregnant with my son. And I just remember, and I still get emotional about it, like crying. And I'm like, and I was living at my building at this point because it was like all hands on deck. Like, we need to clean up Manhattan. We need to like get this building up and running. We have tenants that, are losing money. And I was just like, what am I doing? Like, I'm putting myself in these unsafe conditions. Like, I have two young kids at home. Like, I have my baby growing inside of me. Like, what am I doing? And that was like my first wake up moment. And then a couple of years later, well, 2 years later after having my son, it hit me that I couldn't remember like how often I bathed him because I wasn't the one bathing him. I know it's something so silly, and I'm very blessed. My mom has always watched my kids, but I was working so much that I was like getting home with just enough time to like read all three of them a book, put them to bed. But I'm like, I don't even have that time with my son. So I knew that something had to change with my whole work-life balance. So that was the first piece of it, was getting really clear on my boundaries at work to be able to have more time with my kids. But then once I had that time with my kids, a couple of years went by and I felt like there was a piece of me missing. I was getting the fulfillment of motherhood and being a wife, but there was this, I believe you called it the other day when we chatted, the hollowness. Like, I felt that so deeply, and I knew that I needed to find my purpose in life. And through a lot of soul searching, it came to podcasting. The breadcrumbs led us to the same podcast course. I started that course without even having a podcast, and I just knew that that's what I was meant to do and put in the work. And once I started releasing episodes out into the world and moms started reaching out to me saying what a difference my podcast was making, like, and the global reach. I had a mom in Australia reach out to me, and once she reached out to me, I was like, oh my God, like, this is what I'm meant to do. And it's just been such a driving force on helping me like create those boundaries between work, podcasting, and family.
That's
Hopefully I answered your
amazing.
question.
You absolutely did. You know, I would love for you to talk a little bit about that moment where you were like, I need to create some boundaries around work. And I don't know if you remember what some of those first boundaries were that you needed to make.
So being a property manager, you're on call 24/7. I was a commercial real estate, which meant, I have like tenants, they're all businesses. It's different than residential where it's people's homes. I would never do that. I don't want to be responsible for your homes, but I would get calls all hours in the night. And then I realized that's not the life I want. Now, if you're in that type of job where you're on call, it's very hard to have those boundaries, but you need to take a pause to say, is that really the life I want to have? It wasn't for me. So I luckily work for a big company and there's a lot of inward mobility options. So I moved into a role where I was able to set those boundaries. I was able to work from home, which is amazing. And that was before the COVID days when people were allowed to work from home. And then within that space, I still found that it was very hard to have those boundaries because, people just expect a lot out of you. But it was when I I don't know if you call it a promotion if you're not getting paid more, but I kept getting more work responsibility and more people under me, which I love. I love being a people manager because I feel like I'm, really mentoring people. I don't like to be called a manager. I like to be called a mentor. But when you find yourself working all these extra hours, and especially when you're on a salaried role, the more hours you work, the less you're actually getting paid, if you know what I'm saying. Like, so when you really look at the salary you make, if you end up working more than your like 40 hours a week, if you end up working 50 hours a week, you're actually paying yourself less an hour. You're devaluing the work you're putting in. Listen, I know in any job they require extra hours here and there, but that's where you got to get really clear on your boundaries and really just have that mindset of I'm paying myself less for every extra hour I put in.
That's amazing. I had never really thought of it that way. And I think that would have been really helpful for me, especially early in my career when, I was trying to prove myself and it's also hard because you're also developing skills at that time that I know that I really wore myself out not having incredibly clear boundaries around my work. And it's such a hard thing to sometimes hold to those boundaries, I know. And then you kind of get those boundaries in place and you realize that in order to do that, you have to also be more intentional about your time. One of the things that I'd be interested in hearing from you is what it is that most people misunderstand about women in time management, working moms in time management. Because I get really frustrated sometimes, like I love Cal Newport's work. He, has slow productivity. He has the book Deep Work. There's so many ways that I hold similar values to him, for example. But he's also like, hey, you need to have 4 hours of focused work time in order to get deep work in. And like any working mom that I've ever talked to is just like, what? So what is something that we misunderstand about time management as working moms?
I feel like any mom that I talk to, they're like, you hear the common theme, I need more time in my day. There's just not enough hours in the day. It's deciding what to do with that time. Like I tell all my clients, I could give you hours back in your week. I can find the time for you. But if you don't have that right mindset, if you don't align, first of all, find out what your values are. Like what is important to you? What matters to you? And making sure that's what you're spending your time on, not the scrolling on your phone, not the binging on Netflix, not the sleeping in the morning, which I know a lot of moms need their sleep depending on what season of life you're in. But I am a firm believer of like my morning time, my morning routine is my most sacred time. It is the biggest boundary I hold. I personally get up at 4:30 in the morning. I'm not saying every mom has to do that, but that's when I do my podcast because I work a corporate job still. I do probably more than 40 hours a week, especially I just started a new job. So my morning time, I get up before my kids, I shower, I do my nice morning routine, and then I have a power hour where I do my podcasting, my side business, my social media, my answer emails. And then as soon as I have to get my girls up, my morning routine is over. I move into mom mode. I get my girls and my son. So I have three. I don't know if I said that already. I have a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old. They're both girls. And then my 12-year-old son. He's the most independent, easygoing, gets up on his own. Like the girls need a little push. But as soon as I get them all situated in the morning, that's my mom hat. They're out the door. And then I go into my work day, and then I have my work day. And then come 5 o'clock, as hard as I can have that boundary, I shut it down, and then I go back into kind of mom mode and life
That's
mode, whatever life throws at me. But it's finding the space in your day, and being really intentional about what you're doing with your time, and not wasting it on the things that don't matter. So it's really taking the time to understand what are your biggest distractions? What are your biggest time wasters? Because there's so many as moms. I mean, my oldest now drives, so that's why I don't have to worry about driving them to school. That I'll have to start doing that again next year. But this morning they were running a little late and driving to school, and my other one called me saying, "Oh, can you email the school because there's a lot of traffic. We're probably going to be a few minutes late because they have to find parking, and since they're going later, now they're less parking." And I was like, "Sure, I'll email the school." I pick up my phone. I see the bubbles from Facebook, Instagram, whatever text messages. I start going down a rabbit hole, and then I get a text being like, "Did you call the school? Did you email the school? And I'm like, oh my God, I forgot because I picked up the phone and started doing a million other things. And it's like, that's where you lose focus. Like your cell phone is probably your biggest time waster. And it's the first place I teach people to have those boundaries.
That's amazing. I've been doing a lot of journaling around what I want my 2026 to look and feel like. And I am really considering taking a sabbatical from Instagram because I don't tend to scroll as much on some of the other social media sites, but Instagram is this one that like loops me in. I somehow end up spending silly money on things that I come across in Instagram. And so, that is one of the things that I know has taken up mental space, and I don't really think it's helping me move towards the things that are most important in my life. And one of the biggest things that surprised me when I started getting really intentional about my time was that I decided to quit watching TV. I just realized that I would rather read a book, that it wasn't that I didn't want that downtime. It wasn't that I didn't want to lounge on the couch. It's that I just wasn't getting that much joy from the television that I was watching. And so I almost never watch TV now, or if I do, it feels like a special date with my husband or it's our family watching a movie together. And so that has been a really interesting shift for me, was to sit down and really figure out, well, what are these things I'm spending time on that I'm ready to release? And I have students and I have friends that, they're huge film geeks, and that brings them loads of joy. I would never necessarily ask somebody to choose the same things, but like for me, I realized that that wasn't something that was giving me life.
I've cut out TV too. I've never been big on TV. Like I've never been big on reality shows or, Netflix. I do watch a little bit of TV with like the kids or my husband. If something intentional of, helps us spend time together, especially as teens when they don't want to spend time with you. Like Stranger Things just came out, they just released the 4 episodes and my kids are obsessed with it. Well, my older ones. So I was like, okay, I'll watch it with you, even though I hate gory and scary and all those things. But I'm like, if it's something that brings them joy and it's something we can watch together, like, so I'm very intentional about the TV that I do watch when I watch it, because again, it is one of the biggest time sucks for moms between binging TV and your cell phone. So no, I'm totally right there with you.
I really appreciate, kind of thinking through these small boundaries that we can create. So it's not just like, hey, when am I going to stop work? But also thinking about what are some of the boundaries I need to create when I'm not working so that I can be present. Are there other, really small steps, little things that you did and you're like, ooh, wow, that was really a momentum builder for me?
So 2 things. One thing is the top 3 priorities of the day, like really getting intentional about what those 3 things I could do to make me feel accomplished, but not just in your day, when you get to work too. So I treat work like its own little separate day, although I do personal stuff within my workday, which I could talk about after, of how to be productive within your workday to help your goals. But I also write my top 3 priorities of my workday. So that way I'm able to keep that boundary at the end of the day. I'm like, these were my focus. And if I get those 3 things done, I'm okay closing my computer and putting it away. And I also have a shutdown ritual that I close my computer and I put it in a drawer and it stays in that drawer till I have to open up work again. Like I need that mental reset. And then the other boundary that I put in place was I used to say yes to everything. Like I am a big giver. I love to serve my community in any capacity. I love to help. Like it's honestly what lights me up. But when I'm finding I'm taking something away from myself or my goals or my family by saying yes, I've gotten very good at saying no. Because when you're saying yes to something else, you're saying no to something else. And I found that I kept saying no to the things that really mattered to me most. So even the other day, I'm part of a committee for like a fundraiser for something local in town. And we were going to have our first committee meeting. And I really wanted to be there because it's my like best group of girlfriends. And I know it meant a lot, but I had a deadline for a course that I'm working on that is going to help me move forward in my goals. And that's one of the things as I'm reflecting this year of, what I don't want to focus on the things I didn't accomplish because, you need to celebrate those small wins, but like what held me back this year? And it was not meeting deadlines that I kind of set for myself. And when it came back to making the decision of, do I miss this deadline and go with my friends, or do I actually stop what I'm doing, focus on this deadline that's really going to move the needle forward to like help me get to where I want to get next year? That's where I had to be selfish and say, okay, I need to say yes to myself. And unfortunately, no to them. And I might have disappointed some of them, but I said, listen, let me know what I can do. Whatever outcome came of that meeting, if there's anything I can do on the side, like I will gladly help you. But I needed to say yes to myself tonight.
Yeah. I think there's two things that really stood out to me in that. One, sometimes things light us up, but they still shouldn't be our priority. And that was such a hard thing for me because I was hearing all this like, heck yes or no, kind of things. And I really struggled with it because I'm an easily interested person. So like if they'd be like, well, is this a heck yes or is it a no for you? I'd always be like, heck yes, heck yes. And so I needed a different way to filter things. And I actually would ask myself, like, am I interested in this or am I willing to be committed? Recognizing that commitment meant saying no to some things in order to say yes to that. And that was a really, really helpful shift. And I think that there's just a lot of women that feel like the same way that you just mentioned, like we want to be givers, we want to be able to say yes. And we are actually interested. And it sometimes even is what lights us up. But that doesn't mean that it is the priority in the season that we're in. And that's really hard. And I think the second thing that stood out to me was you're right. Like, I want us to celebrate our wins. And I think that so many of us avoid goal setting or even sometimes doing planning and time management work because it makes us feel icky. Right? Like, if it feels like more pressure in our already pressure filled lives, it can feel like, oh no, I set a goal and I didn't make it again. But sometimes really naming what these patterns that we have, like saying yes and overcommitting, naming what they cost us doesn't feel good, but getting honest with ourselves is imperative. And so it's this thing because I love feeling good. I want to feel good. I want to celebrate. But sometimes getting really honest with ourselves about what our patterns are costing us is what we need in order to move forward.
No, and it's totally true because if nothing changes, nothing changes. So you really have to do the work to reflect on what's working, what's not working. And when you see the things that are not working, identifying those patterns and making those small micro changes. And like that's the biggest thing. Like start small. Like I started very small when I started creating my podcast. And as I got more comfortable with things and I created more time and space, I was able to take on a little more, take on a little more, take on a little more. And then with any sort of habit, it's, everyone starts January 1st with like these big like, crazy goals. And I'm going to lose 20 pounds. I'm going to, save a couple of grand. I'm going to start small, like focus on one thing, pick one thing, go all in, make those tiny little changes, baby steps, enough of them, they add up to big changes.
Yes, I think that I want to create space for women to dream big, but know that big dreams we can start small with. Even big dreams, you just do the next best thing and then the next best thing and then the next best thing. And I think that that's so important to give ourselves permission to dream big but start small.
Yeah. And part of my morning routine is, I do kind of like a devotional meditation type thing. And part of it is saying, asking God, what is my right next step? Like, I don't need to know. I would love to see the big picture. I mean, if you want to show me the big picture, show it to me. Tell me where I'm going to end up. I would love it. But sometimes you don't need to see that. You just need to know what is the right next thing. And once you start being really intentional about asking that question every day, you're going to start seeing what that right next step is. And that next step leads to the right next step and the next step and the next step. And eventually you'll get to your goal. And my other big thing is giving yourself grace. Like I had big goals for myself this year. So, I allowed myself to have the pity party as I'm doing my reflections that I didn't meet the goals, but I moved forward in spite of all the things that happened this year, and I need to celebrate the fact that I got through it and I still have things that I'm very proud of, So celebrating those small wins and giving yourself grace along the way.
So my husband and I sat down to do our annual kind of review, and then we set goals together. Well, we share our individual goals with each other, and then we set family goals together, and we kind of talk through how we can support each other through the goals that we have, both personal and the family goals. And as we were doing our kind of annual review, I had this moment where I was feeling really meh, blah, eh, about this year. And I started to realize that I had done so much. I'd held my first women's conference, and I had spoken quite a bit, and I'd been on like 20 plus podcasts. Like, I had this huge list. And because I'd had like a really tough week before that, I I couldn't see any of those things. Even though I do have these regular practices of recognizing the wins and stuff, I was just feeling really meh. And it was so empowering to sit down and also think about all these beautiful family memories that we created. My son went off the diving board for the first time, and we have two puppies that we survived a year. Many of our furniture did not survive the year, but like we were able to really just reflect and celebrate those things. But as I went through those two, I also recognized and honored how flippin' hard so much of it was. And it wasn't necessarily the things that I thought would be hard. So, I think about like the podcasting. I thought that it was going to be hard to come up with ideas, and I have so many flippin' ideas, y'all. I could have a episode every day. You know, I thought that, just recording consistently would be the hard thing. And actually, it's been more of like the emotional muck. It's been kind of reminding myself that it matters, and, like taking sometimes the dismissive comments people will make, like, oh, everybody has a podcast to say, and kind of navigating that has been far more challenging to me than sitting down and recording. And so sometimes too, or, I gained a lot of weight after turning 40, and I worked really hard this last year. I lost half of it. And thank you. Thank
I
you.
probably gained that much back.
Well, it's so interesting because like I was feeling like, oh my gosh, it took me a whole year to lose like 5 pounds, an entire flipping year. And there was so much emotional, just like, keep trying, Danielle, try this other thing that didn't work. What's next? And it took so much emotional fortitude to not give up. And so, I guess I've just been kind of reflecting on those beautiful wins, but also just honoring the muck of it. I think that it's so important. So, Kerri, if your kids look back someday, what is it that you hope that they remember about how you lived and worked?
So I hope they remember how hard I worked, but how clear and intentional I was with my boundaries, how I always showed up for them. Like through it all, I've never missed a day of a party at school, any shows that they were in. Like I was a class mom throughout elementary every year for one of them. So I was always very intentional in motherhood, still am. And also just that I went for my dream despite everything. And, they know that I'm up at 4:30 in the morning. They're still sleeping, but they know I get up and I work on my podcast. And when I first launched, like they were my biggest cheerleader. Every 1,000 download I would get, like we would celebrate. Now it's kind of like, oh, you got another. But I'm like, once I hit the big number, like we're having a big party. But that you're never too old to chase your dreams. And every day, they know this. My goal every day is to be better than the person I was yesterday. And I try to like instill that in them too. And that every day is a reset. Like, I don't care how bad your day was yesterday. I don't care what bad choices you made. That does not define your future. Like, you learn from it and you grow from it. And every day is a reset.
I love that. I love reminding our kids. I do this with my students. I do this with my clients. Like, we are so much more than a bad moment that we had. We're so much more expansive, and there's so many more possibilities in us than we even have the imagination to know right now. And so, Kerri, I've appreciated our friendship so much and all the wisdom, and you're a really good teacher. I hope that you know that. You are able to break things down in really clear, simple steps that really lead people towards meaningful, lasting change. And I just appreciate you so much.
filled my heart. You have no idea.
Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.